So yeah, my name is Alex, obviously. I'm going to be the host for today's tour. I'm right now in Tel Aviv, where I've been living for the last 4 years. You can probably guess from my accent, if you haven't already met me, that I'm not born and raised here. I'm married into this crazy place. My wife is Israeli. I'm originally from New Zealand, and I love to travel. I adore traveling by train. I agree that it's the best way to do it. And I also love history. I studied history at university, came here to Tel Aviv to do my master's degree studying the conflict. And for the last 3 years, I've been the VP of the Green Olive Collective. I know we've got a lot of Green Olive aficionados here, people who've joined us for tours. But maybe if this is your first Green Olive event, I'll just give you the 10-second spiel about what we do. We're a pretty interesting company because we're a social cooperative made up of 5 working partners who are Israeli, 5 who are Palestinian, 1 who is a New Zealander, and then dozens of other support staff, guides, drivers, administrative staff, and members spread all around the world. I can see a couple of members in today's group, which is great. And we all believe in a just solution to the conflict, which is based around democratic values and human rights for all. We work to end the occupation. We've been around for 13 years, and before COVID did mostly physical tours. And since COVID, we've been doing lots of different online tours and online events, often with different like-minded organizations. Today's one is, I guess, a little bit different in that it's very much focused on kind of one topic. The politics is part of every tour that anyone does, especially Green Olive. But today we're really focusing on the railways and railway travel. And I want to do things a little bit differently today. I want to give everyone the option, if you're feeling like getting involved, of actually controlling the kind of slideshow that I've built yourselves. So what I have here is a link to the Google Earth kind of tour, which I've built. So what I can do is I can copy this link, paste it in the Zoom chat. And if anybody wants to, if you're feeling technologically capable, you can click that link and then you can scroll through the slides as I'm talking. And that way you're able to look around, move the controls, and you can see whatever I'm seeing. I'll try and be quite diligent at letting you know which slide I'm on while I'm talking so you can follow along with me. And if anybody's not up to that and you prefer just to watch, I'm also going to share my screen so you can see me doing it as well. That's totally fine. It's just that we found that sometimes it's a little bit laggy. And if anybody wants to see it in real time, you're more than welcome. I should warn you that I am going to change the link after this, just because I think in the interest of kind of protecting my IP, I want to make sure it's safe. Sherry, you have a question?
Hi, Alex, and I came in a couple minutes late.
No
we would be listening to the audio from the Zoom, but looking at the slides, and we would be moving the slides along.
So if you want to, that is what I'm suggesting. Exactly. You'll still hear me talking, but if you click on that link, you won't see the Zoom screen. You'll see the Google slide, the Google presentation that I've built, and you'll be following through there. But if you don't want to, that's totally fine. You can stick on the Zoom, and in a moment, I'll share my screen so you'll be able to see me doing what I'm doing. It's totally up to you if you prefer to kind of sit back and relax or be a bit more in control.
Okay.
The other thing I should say is that this presentation and all of our online tours that we've been offering over the last year and a half, we've been offering without a registration fee. This is the same with this one. But obviously, as a tour company in COVID, things have been pretty tough recently. So what we encourage is that if you enjoy our presentations and online tours, that you leave a contribution. Whatever you feel today's tour was worth, we thank you very much for that. I'll paste a link in the chat here to our contributions page, where you can leave whatever you'd like to. And I should also say that 10% of all the proceeds from all of our online tours we donate to a very worthy cause, the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, which provides medical care for people in desperate need, particularly in Gaza, particularly children who wouldn't get any medical care any other way. So you're supporting not just one, but two very good causes, our collective and the PCRF. So does anyone have any questions before we begin, or shall we hit the rails? All right, so I'm going to share my screen and show you our first slide. Sorry, just 1 second. Share screen. Perfect. So we're going to start our railway journey today here on the coast. I wonder if anybody can recognize what we're looking at here. Anybody know where we are and want to jump in?
Well, I know obviously, but I live here, so.
Go ahead, Sybil, it's all right.
That's the clock tower in Jaffa.
That's the clock tower in Jaffa, exactly. So if anybody's on the Google controls themselves, you just click on present, it should make it go into full screen, and then you'll see down in the bottom the table of contents with 47 slides, and we are on slide 1. You can see the clock tower of Jaffa, exactly as Sybil said. You can see the construction here, or the renovation of the old Ottoman prison, which then became a fancy hotel. And just over there to the right, you can see the Mediterranean Sea. So the clock tower was built in 1900 to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Ottoman Sultan at the time. And the clock tower also served a very practical purpose. It provided an accurate way of telling the time. The mosques had provided pretty good timekeeping before this, but not good enough for the precision of industrial transportation, specifically the train. So the clock tower here, visible to all around, let you know when the train was leaving. And the first trains that were built here, you can actually see just over here, the rails built into the train tracks. We're now moving to slide number 2 of a tiny little narrow gauge railway, which was built from the port to unload railway supplies and even railway engines. Opened in 1890, and here you can see a picture of it. If you're controlling the Google, you can just click on the small picture on the right and it brings it into full screen. So you can see boats would unload here and they'd be able to use these little narrow gauge rails to bring things towards the central station of Jaffa, which is about 1 kilometer up the road. You can see the little narrow gauge railway there running through the narrow streets of Jaffa. A couple of Jewish gentlemen there walking along the tracks. Such an atmospheric photo. And then here you can see the inauguration of the main line. So that was just a small little 1.5 kilometer long route. And the main line was inaugurated a couple of kilometers outside Jaffa. This is the Ottoman governor here in the middle. Over here on his right and left, we see 2 European gentlemen. This is Johann Fustiger, who was a Protestant banker, and Navon, Mr. Navon or Monsieur Navon was a Jewish, Sephardic Jewish investment seeking individual who managed to get the funding for the first railway from a French company. So these are the two kind of powerhouses behind the first railway that was built in the Middle East. And it's a really interesting kind of mixture here between this Catholic French company, this Protestant Christian banker, this Sephardic Jewish kind of ringleader, and then of course the majority Muslim Ottoman leadership. So let's go and see that train station now. We're going to slide number 3. This is the old Jaffa train station. Again, we're going to click on the small picture here, and you can see how the train station looks today. It was quite recently restored, and it's now kind of leisure center where they have restaurants. People come to take wedding photos. You can see a couple of old railway carriages there you can clamber around on, and kids love it. It's a really nice kind of well-restored space now. A couple of nice wine bars as well. If you move all the way to the very final one of these slides, you can actually go inside one of the carriages. You can see inside a carriage just here. This is how the inside of the carriages look today. The only modern addition there, I guess, is the air conditioning unit, exactly. And alongside the station, there was a whole lot of buildings built, many of them by, as a few people mentioned in the chat before we began, by Germans, part of the Templar movement, who wanted to see the sort of evangelical Christians, wanted to see the Jewish temple rebuilt. And they built many of these warehouses and even homes to be close to the railway station. And if we go back to the Google project and then to our next slide, number 4, we'll see how the railway line looked for most of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even as recently as just a couple of years ago. This shows the old line weaving through the middle of Tel Aviv, the neighborhood of Negev. Pretty run down. It was kind of a makeshift car park. You can look around here over the bridge to the other side as well. If we slip here to number 5, the 5th slide, we'll see a slightly different view. Again, it doesn't look like much. It's pretty unattractive, if you ask me. There's a couple of pictures here which we can click on. You can see an old vision of them building the railway line. This was to connect Jaffa with Jerusalem. Again, the first railway line anywhere in the Middle East. And we're going to skip ahead to the very end of the story, because today it's been very nicely restored. And in this picture, you can see a whole lot of Tel Avivis enjoying what they call the Park Mesilata, the railway track park. Today it's been restored. The rails are still there. You can see them just in the kind of glinting in the sunshine here. But Tel Avivis come down and walk their dogs, ride their bikes, drink wine. This park does take you pretty much directly from my house to the beach. So I'm a big fan of this park. And what you may not know is that actually underneath this park, there are trains running again. They're testing as we speak the Tel Aviv light rail, the first line, which does run along part of the path of this old Ottoman era railway line, which is very interesting. Here you can see a map of the Tel Aviv metropolitan mass transit system. This is very much an optimistic map. Things are very much not looking like this right now. The line that they're building and say should be ready to launch within a year, I wouldn't hold my breath, but that's what they tell us, is the red line. And this section here, with the 2 black lines on the other side of the red, this is the part which is underground running through the middle of Tel Aviv. And then out in the suburbs, a bit more distant, the train will come up above ground again. And they have started work on both the green and the purple lines. So that is all being done. The metro lines, which will go much further out, this is the kind of teal or blue colored lines on this map. They haven't even been started to be thinking about starting just yet. But hopefully in the next decades, this is how the system will look. So we'll close the insert there. And now we're going to go back to the Google presentation and move to slide number 6. So we've come a little bit further north into Tel Aviv proper, where you can still see this building in the middle of the street. This is they call it the customs house. There was a railway station on this Jaffa to Jerusalem line. In the 1960s, that section, which is now that beautiful park, was already not being used. The train station in Jaffa fell into disrepair. And there were stations in Tel Aviv proper which were used. So for a while, this was the terminus of the line. And then more recently, they built a more modern station running through the middle of the Ayalon highway. And if we slide to number 7 on our Google slides, we're crossing the plain. There's a nice flat area of about 40 kilometers, very easy to cross by train, even back in the 1890s when the Ottomans were building this line. You come to the winding hills heading up towards Jerusalem. This is Nahal or Wadi. It's a name for a sort of dry river. Solik, which is an important river in the Bible. Important part of the Samson and Delilah story takes place here, for example. And you can see the Ottoman railway line winding its way around the corner. And if you look over here to the left, you can actually see coming into view one of the most beautiful villages, I think, in all of Israel, Palestine. It's the Palestinian village of Battir. Yeah, it's a couple of you mentioned visiting Battir. I'm not alone in thinking this. The United Nations agrees with me. UNESCO gave this village and the terraces it sits on World Heritage status just a few years ago. It's an amazing place that for hundreds and hundreds of years have used these terraces to great effect. It's almost like a little subtropical jungle in this valley. They use the water to grow amazing fruit and vegetable. It's in a very nice kind of green atmosphere. And believe it or not, this is actually fully under the control of the Palestinian Authority. This is Area A, if you're familiar with the political breakdown. And yet, between Israel, where this picture is taken, and Area A of the Palestinian Authority, there is no physical barrier. You could, if you chose to, walk straight across there. And that's always been the way. Even from 1949 up until 1967, when this was an international border, right? This side of the hill was actually controlled by Jordan, and this side of the hill was controlled by Israel. And all through that time, the trains ran uninterrupted. The villagers of Battir were very proud. They were kind of entrusted with protecting the line and making sure the trains could carry on running, and they did. With almost no incident. It's a really remarkable story. There have been suggestions that the Israelis would like to build the West Bank barrier through here. And part of the reason that the UNESCO World Heritage status was so important was because it kind of nixed that plan. With the UN involved, it was much harder to get it coming through. So for now, we can still see this beautiful view unimpeded as the train winds slowly around the corner through the hills. It becomes very, very steep and the gradient is very, very narrow. Here's another slightly different view of Battir. And in this picture, you can actually see the original work building the line back in the 1890s, a couple of bridges and this incredibly narrow, both narrow gauge and also steep gradient. This was built to 1 meter gauge, so very, very close together. And hopefully in this video, if it works for us, you can actually see from 1896 how a journey would have looked like. Here's the train leaving the station in Jaffa. It's just a couple of seconds. I'll go back to the beginning. This is actually shot by a man who was working for the Lumiere brothers, who were the French sort of inventors of cinema, really. The first moving pictures ever recorded were by the Lumiere brothers. And they sent a man to the Holy Land to film different things. And one of the first things he filmed was this railway. So pretty cool that you can actually see, see the railway as they saw it back in the 1890s. So now we move to slide number 9, where you get another view of Battir in the distance. And as we look down here to the left, you can see a modern train. So the trains ran on this line up until 1998, when they first discussed a more modern route through tunnels, perhaps, to Jerusalem. This was an incredibly slow route, really. Back in the Ottoman times, it was supposed to take...
Quite interesting. Yeah.
Supposed to take 3.5 hours. It often took more like 6.
Well, even 6 hours, it seems an incredibly long time to us, but compared to what they had before, which was 2 days.
You're right, absolutely. 2 days on a camel or 6 hours on a train. I know which I prefer, exactly. But in 1998, it closed, and there was this big discussion about where they could rebuild a more efficient line. In the end, they actually decided to restore this line. They opened part of the section as far as Bet Shemesh in 2003. Then they opened it almost all the way to the old station in Jerusalem in 2005. And the last little section, if we move to slide 10, was cut off. In the very center of Jerusalem, they didn't run trains through the middle anymore. And guess what? They turned that section into Park HaMesila, the train track park. And so for the last, I think it's about 3.5 kilometers through the middle of Jerusalem, the train didn't run anymore. But you can still ride your bike. You can go for a walk, all the way along here. It's, again, a really nice park, but it does unfortunately mean that after 2005, the train would only drop you off in this kind of distant suburb, a station called Malcha, which wasn't really very practical. More on that later. But in the Ottoman times, we would have gone through the very heart of West Jerusalem, and we would have ended up at this station. This was the main central station there in Jerusalem. Again, another kind of elegant Ottoman building. And it's only another short walk from there up the road to the old city. So here we're going to just go to slide number 12, where we get a nice view of the old city. This is from the top of the tower of the YMCA. If anybody knows that building, we start our tours just down here in front of the YMCA. This is the another famous hotel, the King David. And here you can see the shining dome of the the shining golden dome of the Dome of the Rock. This is the wall of the old city. And just down here to the right, the train station is just here somewhere. You can see the hills of Jordan there in the distance. But today, like I said, that station is not being used. That station is cut off from the line. And just like in Jaffa, they restored the station and turned it into a kind of leisure center. Here again, you can see the train tracks running through the middle, but people come here for watching films, eating meals, all that kind of thing. They do different events here as well. I have another really great video from this from the Lumiere brothers here, which I'll play for you, which shows a train leaving that station all the way back in 1897. It was quite a scene, you know. This was a very distant part of the Ottoman Empire, you have to remember. And even such things as like a carriage was very rare at this time. Wheeled transportation in general was pretty uncommon. If you were making that journey, like we said before, it would be two days by horse, donkey, camel, something like that. So this was a big event. People came out to watch it. The tower you can see in the distance, by the way, is the Montefiore windmill, if anyone knows that. And here's the main station building, which we saw just before restored. I see someone said something in the chat. Yes, it's a good point, actually. Someone in the chat does remind everyone to please keep your microphones muted unless you want to ask a question. It's just sometimes there's background noise. So if you want to ask a question, that's totally fine. So we'll move to slide number 14 now, if anyone's following along themselves. And we're going to move quite a long way away. We're going all the way to Istanbul, because although that line, which opened in 1892, was the first line in the Middle East, this was, like I said, a distant part of the empire. Really, the empire's capital was, of course, Istanbul. And this is a great view of Istanbul. If anyone's been there, it's a fabulous city. This is the Bosphorus and the Golden Horn there. And this was, of course, like everything in the Ottoman Empire, the rail hub, just like it was the hub of just about everything else. So we can look around the city here from this great drone view. Over here to the left, this is the Topkapi Palace, where you'll also find the Blue Mosque and Hagia Sophia there in the distance. There was a train station just here on the edge of the Bosphorus, which would take you to Europe. This is the European side in the distance. The famous Orient Express, which would link you to places like Belgrade, Vienna, Paris. You can make that journey in just a couple of days, jump on a ferry, and then come across here to the Asian side, where over here, if anyone's controlling it, it's just to the left of where we began. You can see the main Asian train station. You can see a couple of trains there in the sidings and the old disused sidings over here, which went all the way to the port. This is Haydarpasa station. So slide 15 gets you a front view of Haydarpasa. Unfortunately, this was badly damaged in a fire about a decade ago. It is being restored, but there's huge works going on in the train system in Istanbul. They're building tunnels under the Bosphorus, incredibly complex work, which has of course been delayed. So it's unsure whether Haydarpasa will ever be used as a station again, or maybe restored and turned into a museum. As far as I'm aware, that decision has not yet been made. But this is where trains going to the east would have departed from in Ottoman times. You can see an old steam engine parked out there in front. It's a magnificent building. And here you can see a map of the Ottoman railway network on the eve of the First World War. So slide 16 shows Istanbul here, the Straits of the Bosphorus, the Dardanelles here. Connections, of course, to Europe, but also deep into the Ottoman Empire. One of the famous lines was the Berlin to Baghdad railway, which was a German and Ottoman proposal to link the port of Basra all the way over here, the oil fields of Mesopotamia, with Baghdad, and then eventually all the way through to Europe. That was disrupted just at the beginning of the First World War, but was being built. And then the other famous line, which we're going to talk about in more detail, comes through Anatolia, then through Syria, and all the way down to what's now Saudi Arabia. And that is, of course, the Hejaz Express. Now, this is a super interesting line, which also affects Israel-Palestine. The first thing to say about the Hejaz Railway is that it was funded by Muslim pilgrims, which itself is pretty incredible. They raised money all across the Ottoman Empire. It was designed to be able to bring pilgrims from Istanbul and anywhere else on the railway line to the holy sites of Medina and Mecca. That means that the railway line itself technically was actually kind of owned by the Waqf. The Waqf is like the religious trust, which is a very kind of unique situation. It ran through here with a branch line, interestingly enough, to Haifa, which was actually part of the Hijaz Express. So from the port of Haifa, you could arrive by boat, jump on the train and connect there with the Hijaz Express and head off south. So here we're going to move to slide 17. And we join the Hijaz Express in Damascus. It's not every day, especially nowadays, that you get to take a look at Damascus. But this is the Hejaz Express station in the center of Damascus. Again, a beautiful, beautiful building, which is a railway museum in the middle of Damascus. You can see an old steam engine there. I think it's pretty interesting just to take a look around the streets of Damascus because, again, it's not the easiest place to visit nowadays. Although Damascus has been free of fighting for quite some time. The war kind of didn't rage too long in Damascus. And then if we jump to slide 16, if you're a real train spotter, you can get a closer look here at the old steam engine, nice and close. And slide 18, see a couple of Syrian folk walking across the square outside here. And from Damascus, the train would have headed south and eventually would have met the branch line coming from Haifa. That began here at what they call now Haifa East Station. Now, Haifa East Station is not used currently, although trains do pass through it. They've built 4 stations in Haifa, which are being used today. But Haifa East is just used as the railway museum. This monument here on the left is the monument to the Hejaz Railway and a tribute to the Sultan who was in charge at the time, Abdulhamid II again. You can see a nice picture of the train on the bottom of the sculpture there. Haifa East Railway Station, as well as being home to the wonderful Israeli Railway Museum, which I should give a good pitch to. The director there is Chen Melling, who's a great guy. And as well as being a great museum, the Haifa East Railway Station has a pretty interesting claim to fame. They often say that Haifa East was the only station in the world where at some points you could take a train to 3 different continents. You could go to Africa, Asia, or Europe from the station. As far as I can tell, that's not strictly true because it could take you to the very edge of Asian Istanbul, but it never actually took you across the seas, but still pretty cool that you could take trains to what's now Turkey, Syria, or Egypt from the station at one point in time. So we now move to slide 20. We're going inland from Haifa, and we come to a station here on the Sea of Galilee at Semach, which has also been restored. It's a nice little spot to go visit if anybody is in Israel in the future. The Sea of Galilee is just out of sight over here, and they have a nice little very small museum, but you can still visit the old railway buildings. For a long time, this was where there was a break in gauge and trains would actually stop here. People would have to get on and off as the more modern trains taking you to Haifa would meet the trains that would wind up through the Jordan Valley to connect with the old Hejaz Express. And we also needed to cross a couple of rivers. Here we are on the Hijaz Express at what's known as Gesher, the Hebrew word simply for river. And this is also a kind of cool, unique claim to fame. But the station at Gesher, or the bridge at Gesher.
Gesher means bridge, not river.
Did I say?
Gesher is bridge.
Did I say river? I apologize. It was a slip of the tongue. Gesher is definitely bridge. Thank you for correcting me. Yes, indeed. You can see
it's the name of a kibbutz. It's not just, it's a bridge, but that's the kibbutz there.
Exactly. So it's like a kibbutz named after the famous bridges. And by the way, even long before the railway bridges, there was a famous Roman bridge which crossed the river here. So yeah, the kibbutz is named for the bridge. Quite right. But yeah, the unique claim to fame of the bridge here is that it is the lowest place on Earth that railways have ever run. As you can see in the notes there, minus 257.7 meters below sea level, as the Hejaz Express, the Hejaz Railway, would cross the Jordan River. So here today you can see actually part of the old railway bridge, still a couple of boxcars on the bridge today, although it's completely impossible to cross because it's been damaged. Here you can see the old Roman bridge, and then here to the right, this is actually the site of the old Khan, or a caravanserai, which is like an old, like a traveler's inn. So it was a real point where even before the trains, people would congregate and cross the river. So this was built in 1365, and you can see a nice oil painting of it here, which is a cool reminder of how it maybe looked back in those days. So here we would cross the Jordan River, but there's another river to cross. We'll move to slide 22, where you must cross the Yarmouk River, which is the northern part of the border between Israel and Jordan today. This bridge has also been completely destroyed. You can see it's all turned into rubble here. This is the quite narrow Yarmouk River. Here you can see the pylons on the other side. And this is also a really interesting spot for a couple of reasons. This was one of the first power plants built in Israel, Palestine. It was an early Jewish project to dam the river and generate power. And it's also very interesting because it is right on the border between Israel and Jordan. And for many years, from the peace treaty between Israel and Jordan in 1994, up until just last year, there was actually an interesting arrangement between Israel and Jordan where the Israelis were actually able to cross the river into the Jordanian side, and they actually leased a small piece of territory on the Jordanian side of the river because it's where the power plant was. And actually just last year, the 25-year anniversary of the peace treaty between Israel and Jordan, the Jordanians had the right to not renew that clause in the treaty, and they took that right. So nowadays this area is not accessible, but until just last year, tourists could come and actually sort of temporarily cross the border just through a small gate without getting a stamp on your passport and visit both sides of the river, which is a really, again, unique situation. See a couple of questions in the chat I'll just open. Okay, it's okay. A few people had to leave us, but maybe they can see our recording later. So now we're going to move to slide 23, where we come to the second Yarmouk Bridge. This bridge was blown up in 1946. You can click on this picture and show you how it looks today. Now, this was the famous Night of the Bridges. So we're in 1946, right at the end of the British period of controlling mandatory Palestine, and Jewish forces were getting pretty fed up with the British. They felt like they weren't doing enough to give them their independence, and acts of sabotage like this against British infrastructure became more and more common. Wally Rothschild, who some of us were talking about before, wrote this incredible sort of biography, I guess, of the British person in charge of the railways at this time. And it's a really vivid retelling of that period at the end of the 1940s, when there were people blowing up the railways every couple of days. Bridges were being blown up, depots were being attacked, trains were being attacked. A lot of the workers were Jewish, a lot of the workers were Arab, a lot of the attackers were Jewish, a lot of the attackers were Arab. All these kind of internal things that he was trying to deal with to get the trains running on time. But the most famous attack definitely comes here in 1946, when Jewish groups blow up bridges all throughout the country to try and kind of sever the country from other places, and in many ways kind of preparing for the war which would break out fatefully just a year later. What Israelis know is the War of Independence. And this bridge has never been repaired since 1946, and still looks like this today. So that's the second bridge over the Yarmouk. We're going to go to slide 24 now, where we're coming to a place called Hamat Gader, which has great views of three countries, really. Straight in front of us here is Jordan. All of these hills are Jordan. You can see just to the right there, that bridge, which I showed you a picture of earlier. Maybe I can zoom in a bit. It's a bit blurry, but hopefully you can make out that second Yarmouk bridge there. Where this picture was taken from is actually in the Golan Heights. So this territory it does get a bit confusing, I confess, but between 1949 and 1967, where this photo was taken from was actually in Syria. But then in 1967, the Golan Heights was conquered by Israel in the Six-Day War, and this becomes Israeli territory. So the current border between Israel and Syria is over here in the distance. Those hills there are actually in Syria. So it's almost the tri-point of Israel, Syria, and Jordan. If anyone, by the way, as a little aside, is interested in the story of Eli Cohen, famously turned into a Netflix series last year. Eli Cohen was an Israeli spy who was in Syria before the Six-Day War. And this little observation hut here, today it's just a little shed on the road in the Golan Heights. And this was actually one of the huts where Eli Cohen came and was able to pass information to Israeli intelligence. So here is the border fence between Israel and Jordan. And in slide 25, we're going to go down there and have a closer look. This is a great picture which shows the border fence there and the next river crossing. You can see the railway bridge there heading off towards Syria. This fence is the modern day border. And if we zoom out here, you can get a great view of what's going on all around. So everything on the right-hand side is Jordan. Here on the left-hand side, where the photo was taken from, is today Israel. And it is a quite green part of the country, even in winter. Along the Yarmouk here, you often see bright greenery. And on this side, you can see the ruins of a Syrian mosque. You can see the minaret sticking out of the trees, almost looks like a jungle. You can also see some steam there. This is actually so low that we're quite close to a fissure in the Earth's crust, and there's wonderful hot springs here. So you do see naturally warm water rising up, and you can even see the steam in this picture. Okay, so from this kind of tri-border point, the terrain gets much more smooth, and then it's a pretty straight shot down to Amman, the capital of Jordan. And here we are in the central station of Amman, a modern day view of how the station looked. Believe it or not, there are actually still trains running inside Jordan to this day. Until the war in Syria broke out, you could actually take trains from here to Damascus. So as recently as 2010, there were direct trains linking Amman and Damascus. I would have loved to take that journey. This is an absolute heartbreak for me that I never managed to. So instead, the Jordan Railways run just small trips around Amman. Here's one of the original steam engines, which they have in the station. And here in this video, you can actually see this video comes from just last year. This is like a little pleasure cruise, which the Jordan Railways organised for families, just to do a couple of loops around the suburbs of Amman. It's an amazing thing to watch these huge trains across these very narrow streets with no barriers. There's some pretty hairy moments if you want to watch some thrilling TV. You can watch people's cell phone footage of them zooming in front of these trains in the streets of Amman in 2021. But it's pretty cool that families can jump on these, in many cases, original carriages, mostly pulled nowadays by modern locomotives, but for these cruises through the streets of Amman. I'm friends with some of the guys who run this on Facebook, and they seem very popular. They're sold out most weekends. Kids love it. It's a really cool thing you can do if you ever find yourself in Amman. And here we can actually get inside one of the trains for the first time. Hopefully you really feel like you're on the journey now. This is how the inside of the carriage looks. It's pretty cool that they've restored the original carriages, and you can pile in here and really get a sense of how it would have been to travel all the way back then. Again, the only modern convenience is a couple of added air conditioning units. So if we leave Amman and heading south, that terrain is also fairly straightforward. The next big mountains you come to a couple of 100 kilometers south of there in Wadi Rum, or Wadi Rum in English. Here we are actually inside the coal of a train engine here in Wadi Rum. Again, there's a small mine here. So this section of the train is still actively in use. And they also run occasionally tourist excursions here through the incredible landscape of Wadi Rum. I don't know if anyone's been to Wadi Rum. It's one of Jordan's main kind of highlights. It's pretty cool to see the train tracks kind of appear in the sands in a very kind of unlikely place. Here's another great picture of the tracks just being completely swallowed up by the sands. Many of you may know Wadi Rum and the train from the famous movie, Lawrence of Arabia. Lawrence of Arabia was a real person. He fought alongside the British in the First World War against the Ottomans, part of the Great Arab Revolt in 1917. And famously, he attacked the train lines very, very often. Because as well as bringing pilgrims to the Hajj, a big part of what this railway was supposed to do for the Ottomans was to allow them to exert better control. You know, these were quite far-flung provinces, like we said, and the railway was definitely also built for military reasons, you know, being able to shuttle troops back and forth. And so Lawrence of Arabia's great mission was to disrupt the railways and alongside many Bedouin tribes and from the south of what's now Jordan and the north of what's now Saudi Arabia, they destroyed the tracks many, many times. And I thought it would be fun just to watch a quick clip from the movie, which I've got queued up here. I hope it doesn't spoil it for anyone. If you haven't seen the full thing, you really must. It's a classic Oscar winner with Peter O'Toole. But let's just play a quick clip. It was an absolutely epic movie, the kind that they would never be able to make today. You know, thousands of extras, blowing up a real train. I should add, though, that this actually wasn't shot in Jordan. Much of the film was, but the train scene was actually shot in Spain using mostly Belgian train carriages. But much of the film was shot in Jordan, down in Wadi Rum itself. We'll just watch another couple of minutes because the next scene is pretty great as they all charge towards the train. That whole film, by the way, is on YouTube. So if anybody wants to watch it, you can find the whole movie there. So from the Wadi Rum area, we're now going to go to slide 31. We're skipping quite a lot of the journey, hundreds and hundreds of kilometers. There weren't many stations there in the what's now Saudi Arabia, but there is one here in the kind of the central part of Saudi Arabia, which has been restored. There's not a lot around, but there are a couple of the old railway station sign and terminus buildings there. You can see a huge Saudi flag. I can't imagine many of us have visited Saudi Arabia, although who knows, with the current Mohammed bin Salman, you may be able to visit as a tourist Saudi Arabia sooner than we may think. I'm not sure. But there is a little museum here for real train fans. And if we move now to slide 32, we come to the terminus station of this railway. Now, the original plan, like I said, was to link all the way to the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. In the end, the railway only got as far as Medina before the First World War and folk like Florence and Arabia got in the way and disrupted it. So the train got as far as Medina, and this is where we're going to go as far as today. This is the Medina station. Trains haven't run here since 1920, but this is now, again, a railway museum. And it's also pretty rare to be able to look inside a city like Medina, so I thought we'd take a quick look around here. Maybe greener than you may have thought, certainly greener than I expected to see here. A pretty nice Ottoman era mosque, and then the big modern highways of Saudi Arabia there in the background. And the draw card really for all these people coming to Saudi Arabia was the holy sites. So just a stone's throw from the central station there is the most famous mosque in Medina, Al-Masjid al-Nabi. You can see a fabulous picture of it here, all lit up. This is the holy site for Muslims, because this is where Muhammad came from Mecca. So after Mecca, this is the most holy site for Muslims. And the holy cities cannot be visited by non-Muslims, except on Google Earth. This is how the mosque looks like, if anyone was curious. If we got off the train as a Muslim pilgrim in 1920, we would have seen probably not looking quite like this. It's been very heavily modernized and restored. You can see this big open courtyard here, the main mosque over there, and these nice awnings to provide shade from the scorching Saudi sun. So what about railways in Saudi Arabia today? I'm not going to talk too much about that. We don't want to get too far away from our focus, which is really Israel, Palestine. But there are pretty extensive high-speed modern railways in Saudi Arabia. This station, Al-Qurayat, is very, very swish. It's very, very new. It's just recently been opened, but it does have high-speed rail connections throughout the desert all the way to the capital in Riyadh. And interestingly, this station is only a short couple of kilometers away from the Jordan border. Here's the station as we zoom out, and you can see here the Jordanian border. This is the modern railhead of the Saudi rail network, but you can see here's a border crossing going over to Jordan. People cross this in their thousands every day, particularly at times of Hajj, right, the pilgrimage to Mecca. People cross using this border from all over Iraq and Jordan and Syria. And there are plans to extend this railway into Saudi Arabia. You can see here, they've taken it almost all the way to the border. And we'll zoom out of it to show you a bit more where we are. So the nearest station is this yellow dot, and the nearest railway connection is here. And maybe at the end of the tour, we'll talk a bit more about kind of future plans. But from the Hijaz Express, I wanted to quickly talk about other projects which the Ottomans were frantically building during the First World War. So as well as trying to extend all the way down to Medina and eventually Mecca, they were also fighting a war against the British coming from British Egypt. And through the Negev desert, or Nakab desert in Arabic, the Ottomans were frantically building a line. They managed to connect the network to Beersheba, which was a important Bedouin town, kind of a Bedouin hub in the middle of the Negev or Negev desert. And the railway station which they built has, guess what, been restored. It's not connected to the line. The line opened in 1915, right in the middle of the First World War. It was actually used by the British after they took over until 1927, when it all kind of falls into disrepair. And then the Israeli network, they did build a new station for the north from here in 1956, which is Beersheba North, which is still today part of the Israeli rail network. And this old Ottoman center was restored. Actually managed to get a British locomotive. This was built in the 1940s. British steam train. There's only 13 of this engine anywhere in the world. They managed to import one here to the station. And they also have, quite unusually, a memorial here to Ottoman troops who died in the First World War. Just behind the station, a short walk away, there's a massive Anzac, Australian and New Zealand war memorial to the Anzac troops who died fighting the Ottomans. So quite a unique situation. There's even a plaque here alongside the railway carriages to Ataturk, which is maybe not something here that you might expect to find in the middle of what's now a Jewish city in the middle of Israel. And when the Ottomans were building to Beersheba, really their mission was to continue through the desert. They did have this railway bridge, which you can still see today alongside the modern highway, which crossed a Wadi, a stream which does flood in the winter sometimes. And from there, they wanted to cross the entire desert and connect up, they hoped, with the British railway system in Egypt, and eventually they hoped defeat the British. They never did manage that. In fact, the opposite came true. The British managed to extend their rail networks from Egypt and defeat the Ottomans, of course, in the First World War. So now we are in Egypt at another fascinating piece of railway history. We're actually right now above the Suez Canal. We're on slide 39, if anyone's following us themselves. I can zoom out and show you the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal proved a big challenge to the railways. How on earth do you cross this body of water? And the solution was the El Ferdan Railway Bridge. The El Ferdan Railway Bridge was built by the British in 1918, removed just after the First World War, and then has been built and rebuilt and removed and damaged and rebuilt half a dozen times in the intervening years. It's an incredible, incredible piece of technology. It's the world's largest swing bridge. And you can see here on both the west and east sides of the canal that the bridge swings into place and then allows trains to cross. It does disrupt boat traffic. So for most of its history, it's not been used because the sea passage is so much more important. There's a little quick video I can show you here, filmed from a boat coming along the canal. Maybe I'll turn off the music actually. Coming along the canal, you can see the bridge right there. Certainly one of my big dreams is to take a train, all the way from Cairo to Haifa or even beyond and cross over this bridge one day. In 2001, they rebuilt this bridge. The current one that you see here dates from 2001. But in 2015, so less than 15 years later, the bridge becomes completely obsolete because they build a second canal. Nowadays, to speed up traffic and avoid problems like we had last year when part of the canal was blocked, they're trying to build a parallel canal all the way along. It's not been built everywhere, but here it has. So there are actually two canals. There's another one further to the east, which does not have a way to cross. So since 2015, the bridge is redundant. You can look just a couple hundred meters over here to the eastern canal. And if you zoom in, you can see the second Ferdan bridge is actually being constructed. You can see the construction work and the cranes there. The idea eventually is, in the very near future, it will be finished and railways will be able to cross. Of course, there's not that much for the Egyptians to connect to over there on the east side of the canal. The Sinai Peninsula is pretty sparsely populated, but in general terms, I think it's a really cool sign of potential for cooperation, and maybe joining up the line one day, who knows, with railways here in Israel. That's certainly the great dream for many of us. Okay, so we don't have too many more slides to go now. We have just hit 8 o'clock. I was very much experimental here. I didn't know how long things would take, but hopefully you can all stick with me for the final 7 slides and a bit of discussion perhaps at the end. So we're now in a very different part of the country. Maybe I'll throw it open to the audience. Does anyone recognize this tunnel? Anyone know where we are here?
Am I allowed to answer?
You certainly are.
Rosh Hanikra, on the Lebanese border, north of Nahariya.
Exactly. North of Nahariya, that's the northernmost point of the current Israeli rail network. It's only a short distance from the Lebanese border. And this is an incredible piece of engineering. This is a railway tunnel. You can see up here, maybe zoom in a bit for you. SAEC, the South African Engineering Corps, 1942. So we're now in the middle of the Second World War. There's big problems, of course, in all of the French colonies, places like Syria and Lebanon. All the French colonies were split between following the Vichy government allied with the Nazis, or the Free French government led by Charles de Gaulle in exile. And so for the British, all these French colonies became a point of potential conflict. And they wanted to make sure that they were in good control. And so in 1942, the decision is made to extend the railway north from Haifa. It already went as far as Akko or Acre. This was an important Crusader city, just on the other side of the bay from Haifa. And the decision was made to extend that up to the Lebanon and all the way to Beirut and eventually all the way to Tripoli. Problem is the terrain here at Rosh Hanikra, as Sybil just told us, is very, very difficult. So these South African engineers did an amazing amount of work to blast their way through this beautiful limestone cliff. You can look back here and see the path of the railway along the coastline. And although that this wall does say military area, do not enter, we don't play by the rules. And luckily I can take you right inside. So we're actually now inside the tunnel. We can go all the way along here. And if you go all the way to the end, the railway does actually eventually end at the border itself. There was a tunnel here. There was a tunnel that went through to Lebanon here. But during the 1948 war, again, the war the Israelis call the War of Independence, Jewish forces blew up the tunnel, blocked it. And again, from 1948 until today, it has been blocked. No one has gone through it. No rail traffic has been able to get through it. And the way remains blocked. But that doesn't stop us, of course. We can jump to the other side of the border with the click of a button. And now we're on the Lebanese side of Rosh Hanikra. This same kind of limestone cliffs, beautiful sunsets from up here. If anyone's been along this coast, it's pretty special. And the railway ran just along the top of this headland. This picture here shows you the condition of the rails. Things have been left to rust for 70 years now. So the state of the railways in Lebanon is really terrible. And basically since Lebanese independence, there's really not been a functioning rail network in Lebanon. Since the Lebanese Civil War, 75 to 1990, bombings and things have really devastated the rail network in Lebanon. So the infrastructure there is really in terrible, terrible condition. But for a small period of time in the 1940s, you could take a train from Haifa through those tunnels. You would have passed through here. This is the town of Nakura, which is today a big UN peacekeeping base for UNIFIL. These are a couple of Indonesian UN peacekeepers who have their base here. And I'm not sure if they're aware, but running through the middle of their camp was once upon a time the armed railway.
Seems to have moved away from his legs.
Yes, this is the challenge of what happens when you use a 360-degree camera. He was standing in one place and then it took another picture, and he appears a bit ghostly. This one too. And then from there, all the way up to Beirut. Beirut railway station is pretty close, unfortunately, to the port. And I haven't been able to ascertain how badly it was damaged in the explosion. You can see as I zoom out here, the explosion was just here. You can actually see in this Google Street View the remains of the explosion. This is a pretty modern satellite image. You can see where the building was in this huge crater here. So I'm not sure if the railway building itself has been damaged. I couldn't get the latest information, but certainly before the explosion in the port, this is how the building looked. It's been many years since trains ran here, but it's still, I guess, in passable condition. Part of the building actually was turned into a bar. And this is another one of my great dreams, is to go and spend the night partying in the railway station. Here is the hangar, which has been converted into a nightclub. And the beautiful elite of Beirut come and enjoy a drink there. And the DJ actually sits inside the booth of a train cab, which is my cup of tea. You can see all the young Beirutis out to party. Unfortunately, the bar is closed because of the current situation in Beirut. So although this tour is not that political, it also is pretty sad to imagine what's going on in Beirut right now. So definitely thoughts go out to the people of Beirut who really are suffering a lot from the economic and political crisis right now. We don't want to end on a bad note. So for our last couple of slides, we're going to now move to slide number 45, where we can talk a bit about the future and what things are looking like. So in Israel, the future is pretty bright. There's some new lines being built in quite a few places. Although the beautiful old line from Jaffa to Jerusalem did not reopen after COVID. All the trains stopped in Israel for a couple of months during the peak of the pandemic, and this line did not open again. They did, however, open a modern line running on a completely new route. Whether or not the old line will reopen remains very doubtful. The line is still feasible. You know, you could potentially like do charter trips or weekend trips. This is what I hope they do. For now, though, they say mum's the word. And the demand is very small because this is the big viaduct here, which dramatically crosses the entrance of the valley. This is the highway that many of you will have driven from the coast into Jerusalem here, into the modern station of Jerusalem. There's a quick video you can see here of the train crossing that viaduct. It's a pretty impressive piece of construction. It took nearly 20 years actually between planning and actually opening this train. It goes all the way from now Herzliya, just north of Tel Aviv, right the way through the middle of Tel Aviv to the airport, and then along this, through first a very long tunnel, and then along this very impressive viaduct into West Jerusalem. It's a pretty incredible piece of engineering. It's all electrified, which is a much more environmentally friendly way of doing things and much more efficient once it runs. The cost of this project was pretty significant as well, though, as the train goes into the tunnel. And I did read one report which suggested that this may have actually been the most expensive rail project of all time anywhere, considering the distance as the crow flies from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem is less than 70 kilometers. And this thing cost billions and billions of dollars. But the infrastructure is now there, it is working, and is being used in increasing numbers all the time. So that's one good thing for rail fans. It's now very easy to get between the two cities, only takes half an hour. And then in a bigger sense, the kind of regional outlook, although Israel's direct neighbors in the West Bank, Gaza, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, not in a great financial or engineering status to go ahead and build railways. In the Gulf, things are quite different. This map shows the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council's plans to build railways connecting the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and potentially even Jordan, the West Bank, and Israel. Now, this is not entirely pie in the sky stuff. Certainly, money is no object, right? All these oil-rich countries have plenty of that. Saudi Arabia has, as you can see in this map, a very extensive high-speed line already. And it goes all the way up to the Jordanian border, as I said. It's just a matter of getting the regional cooperation organized. And as one of the big benefits, as I see it, between the recent, normalization deals between Israel and the UAE, among others, is that it senses a general warming of the relationship. And certainly the Jordanians in particular are very interested in building a line connecting Haifa's port to their central manufacturing and exporting areas. So the current Israeli rail network, as you can see in this map, does actually go all the way to Bet Shan, which is only a short distance from the existing border crossing, the Jordan River crossing, they call it. That railway line was built with the idea that one day it could be extended into Jordan. And if we go back to that map, you can see that potentially, maybe one day, it could connect up to the Saudi network. The Saudi Arabians thus far have not been open to normalizing ties with Israel, but it's pretty much an open secret that there are clandestine connections between Saudi businessmen and Israeli businessmen and businesswomen. And these infrastructure projects, although they require a huge amount of goodwill, maybe not so difficult. And although a lot of people are opposed to these normalization deals for good reasons, the Palestinians were completely sidelined by them, there is potential for some really positive things to come out of them. And this is one of them. And the reason I love this railway stuff is because I love to take railway trips. And the idea that you could jump on a train in Haifa and visit Cairo, or visit Damascus, or visit Beirut, or visit Dubai is really, honestly, what I spend hours fantasizing about. And I would absolutely love one day to be able to do this stuff. So all is not lost. There's a lot to be unhappy about in today's world, but hopefully this final note was something to give you a little bit of optimism over. And I really hope that in general, today's tour gave you something to be a bit optimistic about. And I really hope that you all enjoyed yourselves. I certainly had a lot of fun putting this together. It was quite experimental and I had no idea how things would go down. So if you do have any feedback, whether you want to share it with me now or by email later on, I would absolutely love to hear it. But for now, I'm going to say thank you very much. I'm going to stop talking and see if anyone has any questions or comments that they'd like to share with everyone right now. Sybil, are you optimistic? Would you like to take one of these journeys one day, or do you think it's all pie in the sky stuff?
You can dream.
Exactly. If we don't dream, no one else will, you know. It has to be the railway fans who want it more than anyone else. So. Anybody else have any questions, want to see any slides again, or any comments you'd like to share right now? Well,
the only comment I'd like to make is just say thank you. It was interesting. It's what I wanted, and yeah, thank you.
Cool. All right. Cheers, Mark. Glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, I didn't know what anyone would expect. You know, it's kind of hard thing to even describe on a website blurb, like a virtual online railway tour. It's all a bit kind of odd. But yeah, really glad you enjoyed it. Someone's asking in the chat if I'll be able to share this video. So yes, I will. I have recorded it, as I said, and I will be putting this up on YouTube, on excuse me, on our YouTube channel. So if you want to subscribe to Green Olive Tours on YouTube, then you'll get notifications as soon as new videos are posted. And I do hope to be able to do more of these, you know, a couple more sessions. Eventually, I'd love to be able to do this tour physically, maybe only in Israel, Palestine. Before the pandemic, I had put together a kind of itinerary to do like a real 10-day tour, going around and riding the railways as much as possible. So I hope to be able to kind of do a few of these as like a promotion for that tour once maybe the pandemic kind of winds down and the signs are pretty good that we'll be able to do those physically soon. So yeah, watch the space is a short answer. We'll be definitely doing more of these online and you'll be able to see this virtually as well. I see a question. Go ahead, yeah.
We've taken Green Olive tours before. When do you think it will actually be starting tours up again within Israel, Palestine?
So first I should say we are offering tours right now. The only question is, are people able to get in and take them? For those of you who are already here, there's no restrictions on what we can do. So we're able to run tours, you know, as we usually would. For those outside the country, the government has announced that November the 1st, 3 days from now, vaccinated tourists are allowed to enter. This is still not 110% confirmed, and I won't believe it until I actually see it. That is what they're telling us. It is restricted, at least as far as the regulations which have been leaked say, restricted to those who are vaccinated and those who are vaccinated in the last 6 months. I don't know how many of us in this group fall into that category, but that's what they're saying at the moment. But that's pretty good news. So theoretically, from 3 days from now, if you're vaccinated recently, you will be able to come as a tourist and join our tours.
I'm going to say goodbye now, and thanks, Alex. It was very enjoyable.
Good stuff. Great, Sybil. Thanks for joining us. Enjoyed having you with us. Before everyone disappears, I should make one more quick mention of our contributions page. If you did enjoy it and you want to contribute something, whatever you felt the tour was worth, I don't know if you want to calculate the distance of a train ticket from Istanbul to Medina and the round trip, that would be great. No, but whatever you want to contribute, we thank you for that. We, as I said, will be donating some of that to the PCRF, and the rest of it will support our collective. So the link I'll paste one more time in the chat for you all there. Any other questions before we wrap things up and say goodbye? Good stuff. Well, in that case, my friends, really thank you so much for joining us. I hope we can see you again on virtual tours and eventually physical tours. And have a great morning, afternoon, evening, wherever in the world you are joining us from. Bye for now.
Thank you again. Bye.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Philip. Maybe for anyone who's watching this in the future on YouTube, and you can't see the chat, the contributions link is contribute.greenolivetours.com. And we thank you for your support.